Hey there friends, David Lightbringer here with another decently bite-sized video exploring the most magical and interesting places in the world of Ice and Fire. Since we've already tackled the House of the Undying, which was the magical training ground for one Daenerys Targaryen, and also the House of Black and White, which was similarly a magic and skullduggery, we'll call it, training ground for Arya Stark, I figured the logical place to go next would of course be Bloodraven's Cave, where Bran Stark learns to fly amidst a pile of bones, musty weirwood roots, and the last survivors of a million-year-old race of golden-eyed, four-fingered, black-clawed forest elves. Bran also probably ate the brains of his friend Jojen, stirred up into a little bowl of paste, but we're not going to talk about that too much in this video because I have a whole video called Weirwood Paste is People, which you should check out. But what's in the weirwood paste is far from the only mystery of Bloodraven's Cave. For example, what's up with the underground river, with the spells warding the cave, with the giant bat skeletons, or the fact that the roots seem to get thicker and more plentiful the deeper you go underground. Is the planet just a ball of weirwood roots with a smattering of soil on the top? Maybe. Is Bloodraven really the Three-Eyed Crow? We're gonna tackle that pesky question, that's right. And also, will Bran leave the Weirwood Caves as he did on the show? And if he does, what will happen to Bloodraven? Why do the Children of the Forest even need a human greenseer like Bran or Bloodraven in the first place? And how many human greenseers have there been before Bloodraven? How many other Three-Eyed Crows? We're gonna answer all those questions and more. So, let's get this started. Alright, so the first thing that struck me as I was thinking about Bloodraven's Cave is that it really is the most stunning reveal mic drop in the story so far. And it comes after a series of mic drops. So first, Cold Hands, right? Cold Hands. Sam and Gilly are cornered by whites and they're basically screwed. And then we get a Deus Ex Machina, but it's a Night's Watch Ranger where there shouldn't be one. And oh yes, he's dead. He's an ice white that apparently is fighting for Team Living. So that's a thing. And he's riding an elk, which he talks to in the old tongue. That's green man behavior. But again, he's an ice white. So what the hell's going on? Then he tells Bran that he's his monster. Your monster, Brandon Stark. And at the climax of the Cold Hands arc, we get to Bloodraven's Cave and meet a child of the forest, which is another mic drop. We've never seen anything like that so far in the story. I know we've all been sitting with this for 13 years and we talk about the Children of the Forest and the Deep Ones like they're nothing, but try to remember when you're reading this series and the only magical things we've seen are a couple of White Walkers, and then all of a sudden Bran meets a friggin' elf. Bran thinks that he has fallen into one of Old Nan's stories, and that's basically true as he sort of mimics the last hero and Bran the Builder being taken to a secret place to learn the language of the Children of the Forest, which is almost certainly a euphemism for learning how to be a greenseer. And so we meet Leaf, the child of the forest. She's running around setting whites on fire. And then as soon as we come in the cave, in the same chapter, she quickly drops that she walked the world of men for 200 years. So the elves apparently have very long lifespans. And then she also mentions that she learned the common tongue for the Bran boy, which begins to spell out this reality that Bloodraven and the Children of the Forest have been waiting for Bran for God knows how long, a lot longer than he's been alive. And then, before the chapter ends, we go down into the caves and we meet Bloodraven. Before them, a pale lord in ebon finery sat dreaming in a tangled nest of roots, a woven weirwood throne that embraced his withered limbs as a mother does a child. His body was so skeletal and his clothes so rotted that at first Bran took him for another corpse, a dead man propped up so long that the roots had grown over him, under him, and through him. What skin the corpse lord showed was white, save for a bloody blotch that crept up his neck onto his cheek. His white hair was fine and thin as root hair and long enough to brush against the earthen floor. Roots coiled around his legs like wooden serpents. One burrowed through his breeches into the desiccated flesh of his thigh, to emerge again from his shoulder. A spray of dark red leaves sprouted from his skull, and gray mushrooms spotted his brow. A little skin remained, stretched across his face, tight and hard as white leather, but even that was fraying, and here and there the brown and yellow bone beneath was poking through. All right, so this is so shocking in appearance that Mira Reed, who's not frightened by many things, gasps out loud when she sees him like, what the is that? This is basically a rotting corpse that is somehow still alive, but only this is very corpse. This is the corpse lord. The skin is missing. The roots are basically consuming the body slowly, but also nourishing it. He's in some sort of symbiotic relationship with the tree, as we'll talk about, but Bloodraven disappeared in 175 AC, and you'll remember that the story takes place beginning in like 298. Joffrey's name day was 300. So Bloodraven was born in 175, which means he's 125 years old, and he disappeared from the Night's Watch in 252 AC. So that means he's been rotting in the cave here for almost 50 years. And as I mentioned, this is possible because it seems as though the tree roots are nourishing him. So Leaf explains that Lord Brynden drew his life from the tree. And Bloodraven himself says things like, I am tired now and the trees are calling me. So it's like kind of, fatiguing for Bloodraven to be present in his corpse body. He mostly lives inside the tree. And frankly, given the choice, that's, what would you do? And then we have Leaf explaining to Bran that most of him has gone into the tree and that he's lived beyond his mortal lifespan, and yet he lingers. For us, for you, for the realms of men, only a little strength remains in his flesh. He has 1,000 eyes in one, but there is much to watch. One day you will know. So that kind of sums it up. His life is being essentially prolonged by the tree symbiotic thing, and he is essentially waiting for Bran to get born so we could teach him a few things before the long night falls. Classic high fantasy stuff. All right, so next we're going to tackle two topics. One, which is, who is the Three-Eyed Crow? Answer, Bloodraven. I'm going to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt, so just hang on, you naysayers. And then we're going to discuss the idea that Bloodraven has been watching Bran since his birth. So this really, in my opinion, is a big misunderstanding based on not realizing that people aren't necessarily in charge of how they appear to people in dreams. So this theory that the Three-Eyed Crow is someone other than Bloodraven stems from this scene where Bran meets Bloodraven and says, "Are you the Three-Eyed Crow?" And he answers, "A crow? Once I, black of garb and black of blood." And then he goes on to say, "I've been many things, Bran. Now I am as you see me. Now you will understand why I could not come to you except in dreams. I've watched you for a long time, watched you with 1,000 eyes in one. I saw your birth and that of your Lord Father before you. I saw your first step, heard your first word, was part of your first dream. I was watching when you fell, and now you are come to me at last, Brandon Stark, though the hour is late." So as you can see, Bloodraven doesn't exactly recognize the title Three-Eyed Crow. He connects it to the idea that he used to be a member of the Night's Watch. He was a Crow of the Watch some 48 years ago. However, he does claim to have been watching Bran in his life and in his dreams, just as the Three-Eyed Crow does. That's the same thing the Three-Eyed Crow is doing. It's literally counseling Bran in his dreams and potentially influencing those dreams. So Bloodraven also says, "You will fly," in person to Bran, and that's also what the Three-Eyed Crow says to Bran in the dream. But really, the thing that lets us know for certain that Bloodraven is the Three-Eyed Crow is the fact that he continues to appear as the Three-Eyed Crow in Bran's dreams even after Bran has reached the cave. So check out this quote right here. This is from A Dance with Dragons, as are all these quotes, and it says, "The last greenseer, the singers called him, but in Bran's dreams, he was still a three-eyed crow. When Mira Reed asked him his true name, he made a ghastly sound that might have been a chuckle. I wore many names when I was quick, but even I once had a mother, and the name she gave me at her breast was Brynden." So as far as I know, the theories about the Three-Eyed Crow being someone other than Bloodraven, I think it's either time-traveling Bran or sometimes like the spirit of the Weirwood Net itself or something like that. Or you might even say the spirit of Nissa Nissa inside the Weirwood Net, some ancient greenseer. I think time-traveling Bran is the main counter theory. But as you can see in the quote we just read, it's talking about Bloodraven. It switches from saying the last greenseer to saying in Bran's dreams he still appeared as a Three-Eyed Crow, to Bloodraven saying, "Yeah, my name is Brynden." So again, I think this is a misunderstanding from not realizing that people always appear as symbols in dreams or visions to other people, and they're not necessarily in charge of what they look like. So for example, in the Direwolf Net video, we talked about how Bran reached through Summer when he was down in the Winterfell crypts to talk to Jon, which Bran thinks of as reaching Ghost to talk to Jon. However, we get the scene from Jon's point of view, and Jon perceives Bran as a three-eyed weirwood tree that sprouts from a rock and has the face of either Bran or Summer. It's unclear. But yeah, it's a three-eyed Bran tree. And I don't think that Bran is constructing that image. He's not meaning to appear to Jon as a three-eyed weirwood tree. So if Jon were to meet Bran and be like, "Are you the three-eyed weirwood tree?" Bran would probably be like, yeah, you have to open your third eye to use the weirwood. That's right, or something like that. So what's happening is that in the dream realm, a person's strongest attributes translate into symbols. So Bran is using weirwood magic. He's a greenseer, and he's also a skin changer. So he appears as a weirwood tree with a wolf's face and three eyes. It's pretty weird, but that's, it's symbolism. And that's what you came here for. The weird and the symbols. So another example would be when Melisandre sees Bran and Bloodraven through the flame vision. The quote there is, "A wooden face, corpse white. Was this the enemy? 1,000 red eyes floated in the rising flames. He sees me." Beside him, a boy with a wolf's face threw back his head and howled. So again, I think this is another example of the dream realm translating people into symbols. Bloodraven here is a wooden corpse face. That obviously makes sense. He's a tree person that looks like a corpse. And he's got the 1,000 red eyes floating in the flames. He talks about, "I've watched you with 1,000 eyes in one." And then we see Bran as a boy with a wolf's face. I don't think Bran is constructing that image for Melisandre. That's just how Melisandre perceives him through the dream realm, which translates everything into symbols. You follow me. And then finally, on our Westeros tour of how people appear in dreams, we have Jojen's dream of the Ironborn coming to Winterfell. Jojen says, "I dreamed that the sea was lapping all around Winterfell. I saw black waves crashing against the gates and towers, and then the salt water came flowing over the walls and filled the castle. Drowned men were floating in the yard. In the dark of night, the salt sea will flow over these walls. I saw the dead, bloated and drowned." So this is primarily symbolism here. The Ironborn are drowned men who come from the sea. So the yard has drowned men in it. Those are the Ironborn, and the sea is flowing over the walls. The Ironborn came over the walls wet and dripping from the moat. So they did bring water over the walls. It all happened, kinda. And even Mikken, he did drown, but on his own blood after a spear was shoved through his throat. So that's kind of drowned. And a few other people were drowned in the moat, or their corpses at least were left in the moat. And so there you have it. It's symbolism. That's how it works. And thus we see that Bloodraven is the Three-Eyed Crow, and that people's appearances in dreams can have variety, in fact. Bloodraven also appears as a wooden-faced corpse white to Melisandre, and we see that Bran has appeared as both a three-eyed weirwood tree to Jon, but also a boy with a wolf's head to Melisandre. Both of those are accurate to Bran's attributes and symbols, but yeah, they can vary from time to time, and it doesn't seem that people are always in control of how they appear. These symbols are the core parts of who they are. So to sum up, Bloodraven has the magical means and the motive to watch Bran in his dreams. He claims to have done so, and Bran experiences the same three-eyed crow in his dreams in the Weir-Cave that he experienced in his dreams while he was at Winterfell. And that means that Bloodraven has been watching Bran for a long time, and that line, "I was part of your first dream," is a little creepy. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little freaky. But kidding aside, what this means is that Bran's birth was foreseen long in advance. And this would explain how Bloodraven presumably knew to send the pregnant Mama Direwolf through the wall, probably at the Night Fort, to make its way all the way down to the Wolfswood and fight against a stag and die right in the path of the Starks coming home from the execution of Garrett the Night's Watch Ranger. We talked about all of this a little bit more in the Direwolf Net video, so check that one out for more. All right, glad to settle that one finally. Let me know in the comments if I missed something and there's some crack of daylight on the way that Bloodraven isn't the Three-Eyed Crow, but I'm satisfied. So next up we have cave oddities. Yes, there are in fact a few things that you may not have noticed about Bloodraven's Cave, and some that you did, but I bet you there's a couple that you didn't. So you probably do remember that there is a big chasm spanned by a stone bridge. It's at the bottom of that chasm that we have the underground river. It's about 600 feet down, and it's reached by a series of tunnels and then finally a rope ladder. The children of the forest claim that this river flows down to a sunless sea, which is a reference to Sam Coleridge and his poem, but also implies that, it might go somewhere interesting, which we'll get to in a minute. Bloodraven and Bran's Weirwood Thrones are in the big chamber that has this chasm and the river and the stone bridge, and presumably that is so they can get some fresh air. That would be a concern down there. So yeah, they're in a nice big cavern next to the chasm and the river, so there's probably nice air currents flowing all through there. Now, before Bran and company get to this cavern with the chasm and Bloodraven's throne, they pass through a cavern that is even bigger. It's as large as the Great Hall of Winterfell. And I think the purpose of that is just to show us how far underground we are. Big enough for a cavern that big, with a solid ceiling above. So we're hundreds of feet down, perhaps even more. It's hard to say. They go quite a ways before they get to Bloodraven's Cave. Now, one misconception that comes from the show is that Bloodraven's Cave is full of bones. That's actually not true. The bones are only in specific places on the way to Bloodraven's Cave in the books. So, for example, they pass through a place where the skeletons of gigantic bats hung upside down from the ceiling. That's interesting because Viserion hangs upside down from the cave under the pyramid of Meereen, and Dany says he looks like a bat, or maybe it was Quentin, I don't know, but dragons look like bats when they hang upside down. So, are these bat skeletons, or are those Azor Ahai's dragons? Mance did find the dragon horn that he claimed was the horn of Joramun that happens to look almost exactly like Dragonbinder, and he said he found it in a giant's grave in the Frostfangs. So there is a future video to be made about scant little evidence of Azor Ahai's actual dragon presence in the north. Maybe these bat skeletons are dragons. But moving right along, we do have this one specific chamber with a lot of skeletons, and it's actually very interesting. It's got skulls placed into stone niches carved in the wall. It says, the floor of the passage was littered with the bones of birds and beasts, but there were other bones as well, big ones that must have come from giants, and small ones that could have been from children. On either side of them, in niches carved from the stone, skulls looked down on them. Bran saw a bear's skull and a wolf's skull, half a dozen human skulls, and near as many giants. All the rest were small, queerly formed, children of the forest. The roots had grown in and around and through them, every one. A few had ravens perched atop them, watching them pass with bright black eyes. So this is, again, something you might not have noticed. I forgot about this. These aren't greenseers, or else they'd be on Weirwood Thrones. But these skulls in the niches, they do seem to have special significance. They're not just laying on the floor. And that makes me wonder, are these perhaps skin changers? Not greenseers, but skin changers. And all of these animal bones on the floor, presumably, would be the animals that were bonded to these skin changers. That's especially interesting because we see human and also giant skulls, about 6 of each, in with the Child of the Forest skulls. So that means that not only are humans sometimes skin changers, giants might also be skin changers. And that's something I definitely didn't notice or haven't thought about before. But yeah, why not? Why not? That would probably imply green men, because the size difference between a Child of the Forest and a giant seems unworkable. But I don't know, maybe giants are naturally skin changers, just like Children of the Forest. There's a lot we don't know about the evolution of A Song of Ice and Fire, as I always like to say. So there you go. That's the chamber of skin changer skulls, I think. Let me know in the comments what you think that is, but that's what I think that is. And as I said, that is a specific passage that has the bones. The bones are not in Bloodraven's Cave, which is good because otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to breathe in there if there was a bunch of rotting corpses strewn about the floor. I know it makes for good television, but that is not safe to breathe. But instead, the book version of Bloodraven's Cave actually sounds kind of nice. There's talk of rushes, there's moss on the floor, there's mushrooms growing that they eat and cook, and they do make cook fires in that chamber. There's places to sleep for Hodor and Mira and, well, everybody. They've got little sleeping chambers off the main chamber. They keep goats down there. That's another one you might not have noticed or may have forgotten about. Yeah, they keep goats. That's just more evidence that, It's breathable. Sensitive animals like goats can be kept down in the caves. So yeah, there really couldn't be rotting corpses all over the floor. Like I said, Bloodraven stinks bad enough as it is, right? So again, I have to think the caves are in the chamber with the chasm for reasons of fresh air. So next big question, why do the children of the forest need human greenseers like Bloodraven and Bran? This question starts with the side chamber that has more singers, more children of the forest greenseers in weirwood thrones. One was full of singers, enthroned like Brendan in nests of weirwood roots that wove under and through and around their bodies. Most of them looked dead to him, but as he crossed in front of them, their eyes would open and follow the light of his torch. And one of them opened and closed a wrinkled mouth as if he were trying to speak. So this is really an interesting mystery here. These singers may not be much more dead than Brendan. It's hard to say. One of them is trying to talk but can't. Bloodraven can talk, but it's really hard. You'd rather talk to Bran in dreams. That seems easier for him. And all of these near-dead singers can still follow the light with their eyes. So I suspect that what this is the equilibrium that all greenseers reach. They could be 800, 2,000 years old, these child of the forest greenseers. They are basically corpses that have grown into the tree, and they maintain that tiny bit of life pretty much forever. So it could be that literally every greenseer that is in the weirwood net hive mind, quote unquote, is essentially like this. Or maybe they petrify after, 1,000 years or so. And that leads us into the Grey King stuff and the Stark thrones down in the crypts. But check out my Grey King video for more on that. So one quote that is key to consider here comes from Bloodraven himself, who says that for greenseers, their quick years upon the earth are few, but once inside the wood, they linger long indeed. So their quick years, that means the amount of time that they have to run around and be mobile before they get tied up to the tree roots. Because remember, Bran gets sat in his weirwood throne and taps into it magically, but then they pull him off of it and bring him to the sleeping chamber. And in a minute, we're going to talk about the idea of Bran leaving the cave. But obviously, Bran is not tied down, so he is still mobile. So those are the quick years. Essentially, what Brendan is saying is that the amount of time that they linger inside the wood is much longer than the time where they are mobile. So yeah, these greenseers, these child of the forest singers on the weirwood thrones, they are lingering long indeed. Perhaps centuries and even eons. And one does have to wonder what these greenseers are up to. Are they just in the weirwood net? Or are they piloting specific ravens around and doing Bloodraven secret agent stuff? I'm thinking they're probably fully immersed in the hive mind, but yeah, maybe they're out there flying the ravens, helping cold hands, peck the eyes out of all the traitors. So getting back to the question of why do the children need human greenseers if they clearly do have their own greenseers? Well, it's probably just a population question. Bran mentions that there's only about 60 singers left running around in these caves, and although we don't know that this is the last repository of children, we're kind of given that impression. So with the children being so few in number, their odds of having a greenseer born in any given generation are just a lot lower than they could be. And so it is likely the case that the children of the forest simply haven't had a new greenseer born in a couple of centuries, and they recruited Bloodraven. That means that Bloodraven, for all we know, he could be the first human three-eyed crow. People are actually looking through the history for people that have disappeared and maybe become a previous three-eyed crow. And that's certainly possible, but it could be that Bloodraven is the first and that they've all been children before this, because that's all we see. We don't see other human greenseers enthroned anywhere else in there, just a rack of children of the forest and Bloodraven. I don't know that it's a big thing as far as something that matters to the story that we really need to know. But what is clear and what is important for the story is the idea that Bran has a special destiny, and that, again, the children and Bloodraven have been waiting and watching for him. And assuming there is a new long night coming in the winds of winter, and assuming that's coming, Bran's going to be the greenseer during the long night. So that's pretty important. I actually think it's more than that. I think that Bran is going to fix the weirwood net. And that's a topic I've talked about in a few videos, such as Weir Walkers, The Others Were Green Men, and King Bran Part 3. All right, so the last thing that you may or may not have noticed about Bloodraven's cave is that the roots get thicker and more plentiful as you go deeper, which does lead one to wonder if the planet is a ball of weirwood roots. So just following Bran's journey down to Bloodraven's cave, first it's described as a dirt and stone tunnel with one weirwood root hanging down that Bran bumps his head on. Then as they go deeper down, they see more roots, and Hodor begins to be afraid because they look like milk snakes and grave worms. And Bran has to comfort him and says, it's just weirwood roots, like at Winterfell. Then they hit that cavern that's as large as Winterfell's Great Hall, and it has stalactites and stalagmites, but no weirwood roots are mentioned here. So we're pretty far underground, and there's not a lot of weirwood roots, just the occasional one, and none mentioned in this big cavern. But all that changes after they pass out of the big cavern. The roots were everywhere, twisting through earth and stone, closing off some passages and holding up the roofs of others. All the color is gone, Bran realized suddenly. The world was black soil and white wood. The heart tree at Winterfell had roots as thick around as a giant's legs, but these were even thicker, and Bran had never seen so many of them. So something is definitely fishy here. The thickest tree roots should be at the base of the tree. That's how trees work. The roots get narrower as they go down deeper into the soil. But here we have tree roots that are thicker than the ones at the base of the Winterfell heart tree, which is an 8,000-year-old weirwood tree or something like that. These roots, hundreds of feet down below the ground, are thicker, and they're more plentiful. They're everywhere. They're closing off tunnels. They're holding up the ceiling. They're holding up the walls. So this is weird. This is weird. They're getting thicker, and they're getting more plentiful as they go down. So then they go through that passage with all the niches in the wall and the skulls, where there are more weirwood roots. And then finally they arrive to Bloodraven's cave with the Weir Nest. And obviously there's a lot of weirwood roots in that cavern. So we are just well beyond any sort of normal tree activity. Clearly, there's a lot more of the weirwood organism, as I like to call it, below the ground than there is above the ground. A lot more. Hundreds and hundreds of feet more. So yeah, maybe the planet has a core of weirwood roots. Or maybe they're just all through Westeros. It's probably more likely that they connect all through Westeros, but yeah. The weirwood net, as we call it, turns out to be an Ethernet. It has a landline. It's physically connected all through the realms, it would seem. This is fun stuff. I love this. And of course, many of you watching this will be thinking of the Pando organism. That's potentially part of the inspiration for this. But actually, we've now found out that all forests are connected through the root zones, primarily through networks of mycelium fungus. And that's one of the reasons why you see mushrooms sprouting from Bloodraven's head. Because George, and this is kind of an old hippie thing, to be aware of, the idea that there are fungus networks connecting the roots and the whole forest is connected and can shift nutrients around and be aware of when there's blight or a predator attacking one tree and things like that. Go watch some documentaries, but yeah, that's why Bloodraven has mushrooms. It's not just because of psychedelics and the Weir paste, it's also because of mycelium fungal networks. All right, fall of the Weir-Cave. So let's talk about the idea of the White Walkers attacking the cave and, well, something like what was on the show, frankly. The cave is protected by wards. That's the first thing we need to point out. Those wards are directly referred to by the children, and we are told that they keep the whites out. And obviously that is the case because we don't see any whites in the cave. That also means these wards prevent the others from raising the dead that are inside the cave because there's a lot of corpses in there, but those can't be whited because of the wards. This is similar to Storm's End, the caverns below Storm's End, which, of course, there's a giant old weirwood tree, or there was, till Melisandre burned it. But those are weirwood caverns also, and they are similarly warded. Specifically, they are warded against shadows, and the same goes for the Night Fort under the wall. Shadows cannot pass these wards, so cold hands can't pass the wall. The White Walkers and whites can't pass the wall unless they're carried, like Jafer and Othor. They were carried across. But getting back to Storm's End, Melisandre, that's why she has to have Davos row her inside the caverns and past the wards before she gives birth to the Shadow Baby. This implies that other weirwood caves, probably all of them, are similarly warded. So Winterfell's crypts, which would be caverns under there, it's basically under the Godswood. So those are weirwood caves. There's probably some greenseers down there on the lowest level. And yeah, this is why, or part of the reason why, the first men seemingly built all of their oldest castles around weirwood trees and their cavern systems. These warded caverns might have been the only safe places to hide during the long night. So coming out of the long night, the first men were like, yeah, let's build castles around these protected sacred trees and their caverns. And check out my Timeline Heresy video called The Pact for more on this. But yeah, I think that the first men adopted the religion of the children of the forest, so to speak, after the long night, after the children helped the first men survive. And that would be when they built these early castles. So Bloodraven's cave is warded, and in fact, it may even be the same cave that Bran the Builder was taken to learn the language of the children of the forest. It says he was taken to a secret place, and obviously Bran is paralleling that, but yeah, the original Bran the Builder cave is either the Winterfell crypts or Bloodraven's cave, so... Now, one of the things that we have confirmed by the showrunners as coming from George directly is the idea that King Bran will be the final king of this. Can you do air quotes with one hand? That he'll be the final king of the story in some sense. That pretty much means that he has to leave the Weirwood Cave. I once thought that maybe he'd stay there forever, but no. We can be pretty much sure that Bran is going to leave the Weirwood Cave. So the question becomes, will it look something like what we saw on the show? Will the others break the wards and attack and force Bran from the cave? That does seem like a good story. It was pretty friggin' dramatic. It was one of my favorite episodes. I think that was the most terrifying the White Walkers have ever been. Invading the cave, overcoming the children, Night King looking at Bloodraven, spearing him like that, seeing Bloodraven die in the dream. Like, that was all pretty friggin' cool. And another thing that we know came from George is the hold the door thing. The idea that Hodor's brain scramble happens via a time loop and him sort of holding a door, that Hodor is a contraction of hold the door. And we've since found a lot of foreshadowing in the books for that as well. And that pretty much also indicates that they will be fleeing from whites and others at some point. Otherwise, there'd be no door to hold. And of course, holding the door just means that he's holding the pass. So it doesn't literally mean that he'll be holding a door shut like we saw on the show, but it means that he will be holding some sort of passage that is a door. Now, I strongly suspect that will be the Night Fort. That will be the Weirwood Face door at the Night Fort. Hodor's original name is Walder, and Walder sounds like wall door, and the door in the wall is the Black Gate. And actually, Greyways Tim and I went into more detail about this in the Rickon stream, because there's foreshadowing of Rickon going to the Freys, and Walder Frey is also holding a crossing, and we got into the whole symbolism of the crossing and the wall door, and it was pretty interesting. But the bottom line is that we think Hodor is going to hold the door at the Black Gate, and all of this implies that they'll be fleeing from Bloodraven's cave, potentially through the caves or using the river. We'll get to that in just a second. But another clue about the others invading Bloodraven's Weir-Cave is the ice mark, the one where Night King sort of grabbed his wrist inside the Weir Dream, and then when Bran wakes up, he sees there's a little frosty patch on his arm. That's interesting for two reasons. One, there's a castle on the wall named Ice Mark, and that was an ice mark. And then we've also seen Quaithe use the two-finger touch on Dany's wrist, seemingly to mark her, so that she can later contact Dany via glass candle. So that's a candle mark or a dragon mark. I don't know. But it seems to be a magical technique, marking somebody. So potentially that whole, or at least a lot of that sequence we saw on the show came from George. And I do think that Bran is going to confront whatever is the reality behind Night King or the Great Other. I think that's dead Azor Ahai's spirit that became Night King and lingers in the other's half of the Weirwood net. Sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo sometimes when I say it, but yeah. There's some entity in the Weir net that is the truth behind the Great Other. And I do think that Bran will see it and contact it. So again, the entire sequence that we saw on the show could be based on something George said, and we could get the invasion of the Weir-Cave because of breaching the wards in the spirit realm or something cool like that. And one imagines this might be coinciding with the fall of the Long Night, or maybe this will happen right before the others, break through the wall and invade Westeros. But yeah, this is definitely the shit hitting the fan type stuff. So one question that occurs to me, if the others do invade the Weir-Cave, and I'll just remind everyone, there is no Night King in the books like on the show that we've seen. We've only seen White Walkers, but many people have theorized that there is some sort of Night King spirit in the Weirwood net, maybe a Night's Queen too, controlling all the shit. Who knows? But the point is, we do have White Walkers, and the White Walkers may invade Bloodraven's cave, and if they do, what's going to happen to all those singers? All the children of the forest greenseers on all those thrones? What happens if the White Walkers not only kill Bloodraven, but if they kill all those singers? That would just seem really terrible, and what the consequences of that would be for the Weirwood net, I can only imagine. So just to ratchet up the sort of terror and potential danger that the others pose, imagine them breaking into this cave and executing or freezing or something all of these greenseers. That might be very bad. All right, so final topic. How will Bran leave, assuming he does have to leave? First of all, there is a sinkhole, a backdoor entrance that Cold Hands refers to 3 miles away from the entrance to Bloodraven's cave. Preston Jacobs' famous time-traveling Bran theory, which I'm a big fan of, check that one out if you haven't before, utilizes this route in a very complex, time-loopy way. But yeah, it's using this as a potential escape route. So this is one possibility. Whether there's any time-traveling Bran or not, this is a backdoor exit. Now, as I said, I think there is a lot of clues that the door that Hodor will hold is actually all the way back at the Night Fort. And way back in the day, when I was doing Winds of Winter predictions videos with my friend Quinn's Ideas, and check out his channel, of course, if you're into Dune or literally anything sci-fi, check out Quinn's Ideas. Absolutely killing it these days. And in our Winds of Winter prediction video for Bran, which you can find in the description below the video, he suggested the river. The river flowing 600 feet below the cavern. Not only is the river potentially a good escape route, Meera Reed knows how to make reed boats. That's specifically what the Crannog men know how to do. It seems like there should be more than enough wood, dead weirwood roots, and things like that. It's mentioned that dead weirwood is woven into the throne, so it's both living roots and dead weirwood. So yeah, I think Meera Reed could make a boat and put baby Moses Bran in it and sail down the underground Nile River. And here's the thing, there is precedent for making a weirwood boat, and that would be the Grey King. Check out my recent video, Naga's Bones, for more on this. But yeah, the Grey King seems to have made a weirwood boat. He cut down the demon tree Ig, which is a reference to Yggdrasil and thus to the weirwoods. And that boat turns out to be an ark, a giant boat, which was apparently flipped over in the Viking fashion and turned into the Grey King's long haul after he beached it after sailing here from Shai or wherever. And after 1,000 years or more, that weirwood frame of the boat would have petrified, turned into the rib structure, and eventually over time it became confused with the idea of a sea monster. And again, check out Naga's Bones for the full story, but that is a weirwood boat. It exists in the story. And so if Meera Reed makes a weirwood boat and sails Bran out of it, again, like baby Moses, that would be cool, and it would be paralleling the Grey King, whom Bran has extensive parallels to anyway. And check out my Grey King video for that story. Now, you may remember that there is that rope ladder, and that Meera says, oh, Hodor couldn't climb down the ladder with you on his back. However, they could lower Bran down using a rope, and then, like Hodor could lower him down with Bran hanging on the rope, and then Hodor could climb down. So I do think Hodor can make it onto the boat. And now with everybody on the weirwood boat on the river, we can sail back to where? Probably the Night Fort, probably the well. If you remember, there's water down there. And they went down the well, there's steps in the well, they went halfway down to get to the Black Gate door, which is in the side of the well, and that leads to the tunnel system that goes under the wall. So I suspect if the river leads anywhere, it's gonna lead to that water at the very bottom of the well, and they'll be able to climb up the steps to the Night Fort, and Hodor, will then be in position to hold the door. Or perhaps the well is just to show us that there's water down there, but they'll come up through the cave system and end up actually at the Black Gate. Remember, we don't know what's on the back side of the Black Gate. Is it the back of the face, like you're inside the skull? Is it a weird butt? We don't know. Probably another face, I'm guessing, on both sides, but it's unclear. It's very unclear. In any case, I think this makes a lot more sense than Meera Reed pulling a sled. See, that's the thing, is if Hodor holds the door somewhere near the cave, you get the problem the show had, and that's that Meera Reed now has to pull Bran on a sled through the woods, and that just doesn't seem like a good plan. It's not really what Meera's cut out for. Jojen's on the mission so he can become Weir paste for Bran to eat and awaken his gifts. Why is Meera there? Well, because she knows how to make boats. So again, shout out to Quinn's Ideas, who started this theory, and I do think it makes more sense than Meera pulling Bran on a sled through the haunted forest. So stay tuned for my Night Fort video, which will be coming up in this series, where we will go back into that Hodor symbolism and try to firm up that theory. But that's all I've got for you today. This has been Bloodraven's Cave. I've been David Lightbringer. I hope you've had a good time. And if you did, please leave a comment below the video, click the little thumbs up button, And make sure you're subscribed because, again, YouTube is known for its free, meaning that it will not show you videos from channels that you watch all the time and like very much and frequently leave comments on. So just click the little bell, make sure it says all notifications, and you'll never miss a video or a live stream. And with that, I'll see you next Sunday.